Good and gracious God, we ask that you would speak to us today. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable to our God and King. Amen. Friends, this morning we are looking at a story that many of us have learned in our Sunday school classes, a story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three young men who refuse to bow down to an idol. This morning, I want to point out a few details and draw out the story of this story for our meditation, some of the details we might have missed in our Sunday school class. So the king's name is Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled during this time. Nebuchadnezzar was known as a military man. He ruled his kingdom with his military might. He was known as one of the most powerful kings that ever ruled Babylon. And Like most kings, he was a little eccentric, if you will. The duties of a king are two, in my opinion. One of the things that a king needs to do is to protect his people, and the second one is to provide for the people who are under his care. And this was his primary duty, but I don't know if he really lived into those two primary duties that were assigned to him. But here, the king wanted to make a statement. In this story, the king wanted to make a statement about his wealth. And he wanted to communicate that he had a lot of power because he was a rich man. And when poor people looked, or the commoners looked at his wealth, they were terrified. And they wanted to obey him. They wanted to do everything he asked them to do. That's what Nebuchadnezzar did when he did the following. He decided one day that he is going to build an enormous golden idol. This idol that he was building, we're told, was about 60 cubic feet long by 60 cubic feet wide. That means this golden image that was created by Nebuchadnezzar or ordered by him was 90 feet tall. Can you imagine that? It's almost like almost a 10-story building and 90 feet wide. And everyone could see this absolute gigantic idol from all over town. I cannot fathom the cost that might have happened to build this kind of gold idol. Just think about that, right? Like, king is supposed to provide for those who are under his care. What if he took all that gold, right, and sold it to the other kingdoms that were around him and gave that money to the poor, right? Like, think about how much good he would have done in his kingdom. But no, he wanted to make a statement. He wanted to make a statement that reminded everybody about that he was king and he had all the power and all the wealth that money can buy. The king later makes another statement to say that to show his power, he makes a decree, if you will. And his decree is to bring everybody into town to worship this golden idol. He extends this invitation to everyone who's ever served in any role in government. Okay? And this is what we're told, that here is who he invited to come to this dedication of this idol. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So the satraps and the prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Here we're told that there are 8 different categories of officials who were invited to come to this dedication. 8 different categories in all these branches of government, if you will. They came with their supporting cast. All of them showed up when the king summoned. Look at the power differential here. Look how powerful this king is. He tells these 8 groups of people, come for this dedication And they all show up. And they stood before it. Not one person sent a letter back to the king that read something like this. We would have gotten it if I had asked people to come. It would have read something like this. Thank you for the invite. I am so honored that you would consider that I be part of this such an auspicious moment of dedicating this idol. I have family in Dora where the idol is being dedicated. I would love to come, but I've failed to regret. I'm regretfully informing you that my kid has a soccer game this weekend. I'm sorry, I can't come. Like, not one person said that. The king said, come. They all showed up. Look at the power this king has. He tells us what to do, and exactly that is done. End of story. He's got a huge idol, 90 feet tall, 90 feet wide, all made of gold. And then we're told exactly who all are present in the diversity of everyone who's present for this ceremony. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. The officials who showed up from all over Babylon were supposed to do this. They're supposed to bow down before the idol. That's what they're supposed to do. It is really simple. Here we're reminded that King Nebuchadnezzar conquered and ruled various nations that were now under his control. The enormity of his kingdom is displayed here. No matter what language you speak, you are supposed to do this. No matter which country you come from, this is what you're called to do. You don't have an excuse. You have to follow the commands that the king has set forth. The instructions are clear and simple. You'll hear the music. You will bow down and worship the image that is set up by the king. And the consequences for those who don't follow this edict, this order, you'll be thrown into a fiery furnace. The music is played, and everyone from the province or the region and state, all the officials and their entourage, they all worship the idol. All is well. And the king set out to prove his power, and he did, and everyone followed suit. Remember I said, I think there were a lot of people at this event just by reading this. When you think about this, I said there were 8 different ranking officials who were invited to come to this event. And even this is true in our culture, and this is true, more true, ever so true in this culture of the kingdom of Babylon. Anytime you invite a politician, they usually come with their entourage. Isn't that true? You've seen that before? You all need to say yes. Thank you. All right. So these 8 people who were listed here, they would have come with their own entourage. Maybe they had like 50 people with them just to show off their own power. Look how many people I brought to this event, King Nebuchadnezzar. I got him and her and my other sons, blah, blah, blah. They were all there for this big event, right? If that's the case, there are about 400 people there. And this event is being held in the province of Babylon. That means where the kingdom, where the capital is. Think about all the kingsmen and all the officials, everyone who was part of the guards, and everybody who showed up. That would have been another 500 people. So we're looking about 1,000 people who were there worshiping this idol. About 1,000 people. There were different languages being spoken and different nations being present. And that's who was there. Everybody was there. And they worshiped this idol. This is something that happens over and over again. This is just a side note that I want to kind of point out or mention. I think it's worth noting for us. There are evil people who always want to hurt the Israelites. So many stories come to mind when you think about it. There is some sort of a jealousy or plain hatred towards those who identify themselves as Jews. One example that comes to mind is when we read the story of Ruth. There was one man who hated the Jewish people and wanted to annihilate the entire people. When you think about the story of Pharaoh, one man who was scared and he wanted to kill all the male offspring so that the nation of Israel would not survive. There are always people looking to hurt those who God identifies themselves as my people. Out of these 1,000 people that were there, right? Think about it. 1,000 people, right? And that's my hypothesis. 1,000 people. They all come, they worship, they bow down. It's a joyous occasion. Music is being played. King Nebuchadnezzar is seen as one who is of power. Everyone obeyed his decree. Right? But the story doesn't end there. There were a group of people, astrologers, we are told, who did not like the Jews. They were quick to be a snitch in this story. They went running and told the king, "Hey, king, I know there are 1,000 people here who all worshiped the idol, but there were three people who didn't worship. What are you going to do about it?" Like when you think about that story, think about how futile that is. Right? 1,000 people worship. Three young men were standing there by themselves, didn't do it. Who cares? Look the other way, move on. No. They wanted to come after these three individuals who worship the living God. And they went to the king and said, these three guys that you appointed over Babylon, these three guys did not worship. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What are you going to do about it, king? What are you going to do about it? The whole event of creating this huge idol that's 90 feet tall, 90 feet wide, made with gold, inviting everyone in the government to come to this event was all about proving King Nebuchadnezzar's power. That's it. It was about proving that he is king. He wanted to display his might. And now, three young men are challenging his power. Verse 13 tells us exactly what happened. King Nebuchadnezzar, we read, was furious with anger. In front of the entire kingdom, these three young men challenged his authority as king. And the astrologers wanted the demise of these three young Jews. Again, look at the power dynamic at play here. Three young men upset the most powerful man on earth by not worshiping the idol that was made of gold. So the king summons these three young guys. Who are these three young men? When King Nebuchadnezzar captured Judah, he enslaved a lot of people. He took them as slaves. He took them back to his kingdom. And the king's assistants, they were told to take care of the bright and the best. And so they were put in an academy, if you will. And they were to learn the language and the culture and the customs of King Nebuchadnezzar, so that they could then serve as political appointees for the king. That's who these guys were. And the next question is why? Why did they not worship this idol? Why did they not worship this idol? We're told that these three individuals did not worship the idol is because they knew the 10 Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, this is what we read. Start reading from verse 2. These is the core of what we believe. Hear these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven or above or on earth or beneath or even in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, I am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to their third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Friends, these three guys were following the first two commandments. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not worship a graven image. And I love this interaction when these three guys are brought before the king. And they are talking to the king. They're kind of going back and forth. Again, remember the power differential. All that King Nebuchadnezzar wants to do is prove his power. And here, these three young guys show up in his presence and they have a conversation. And the conversation is but polite. This is something that I've told my kids over and over again. And I'm sure you as parents have said this as well. Read the room. How many of you said that? Read the room. If somebody's yelling, don't yell back, because nothing's good's going to come out of it, right? Read the room. Find out why they're yelling and why they're upset. Find a way to make peace, right? We've done that over and over again. And these three guys can't read the room. They see the king is upset. They see the king is furious. They see all that. And this is how they respond to the king. Verse 16, I'm shocked that they would speak to the king this way, who's there just to prove that he has power, wealth, and might. This is how they respond. King Nebuchadnezzar, verse 16, King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Basically, they're saying, talk to the hand. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Verse 18. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Look at the courage of these young men. God will deliver us from your hands, your majesty. At least they were polite. Right? But even if he does not, we want you to know. But even if he does not, we want you to know that we will not worship the image that you have set up. This monstrosity of an idol that you have created. I love the conviction of these young men who are saying no matter what the consequences are, no matter what you think you can do to us, we are not going to worship the idol. So be our guest and do what you need to do. Even if our God doesn't show up, we are not going to worship. For these three young men, they were taken up as slaves. We don't know anything about their parents. See, one of the reasons we obeyed when we were children, or even now sometimes when we obey rules and follow, is like we're worried what our parents are going to say to us, right? We don't want to be caught doing the wrong thing. But no one's watching over these three young men. And yet there is a sense of conviction that they are going to follow the commands of God and not worship the idol. They are not going to have another God before them. The question for us to consider this morning is, if we found ourselves in this situation, what would we do? How would you live? How would I live? What choices would I make if I had to follow the Ten Commandments or worship a golden idol? What would I choose? How would you choose when the decision is life or death? Earlier in my sermon, I made this hypothesis saying that there were about 1,000 people there, right? Over 1,000 people, I would think. And in that thousands of people who are there, there could be some who were been brought as captives from Judah as well. What if they were worshiping the idol? And they were fine with that. And you see them worshiping the idol and say, well, it's not too bad. Nothing bad has happened to them. How would you and I react in this situation when we see others worshiping an idol, even though we know that they know they're not supposed to? There is no harm in worshiping that idol. Something for us to ponder. Something for us to ponder. Going back to the story, the statements made by the young men, that even if our God doesn't come to rescue us, it doesn't matter. We're not going to worship the idol. King Nebuchadnezzar was furious. I mean, he thought he was angry. Now he was really, really angry because he is being challenged to his faith by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He is so angry that he tells his people to turn up the heat 7 times more. And he instructs these 3 young men to be thrown into the furnace. The heat is so hot that they try to prevent themselves from getting scorched by the heat. And yet, as they carried these 3 men into the furnace, the persons who were carrying themselves found themselves dead. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not know how it was going to end when they decided to follow the 10 Commandments. This led to the biggest miracle ever witnessed. Even the flames could not consume the young men who took a stand for their faith. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand as heroes of our faith. When we see their example, wonder if you will ever be able to do what they did. Right? Like, how could they have done it? How could they have garnered such strength? Being young people who were carried as slaves in a different nation, didn't know a whole lot of anybody, and yet stood toe to toe to the most powerful human being on earth and took their stand and said, no, we are not doing that. How did they get that strength? How did they get that strength to stand true to their faith? I want to share this story with you. As many of you know, I'm a big fan of sports. I love talking about sports. And these past couple of weeks have been the Olympics. I love watching track and field. Anybody big track and field fans? I just love it. I truly do. I mean, I like watching all of them, like basketball yesterday, soccer, like I'll watch all of it. But track and field, there's something that you see in these athletes who just push themselves to get a gold. Right? Just push themselves with everything in that. You can see it in their eyes, just going against everything their body is telling them not to do. And even as I cheer for a goal, I love a good backstory as to how they got to where they are. The person who won the gold for the 400 meters for Team USA, he said that he thanked his community college for allowing him to run. It was not a big Ivy League scout that came and picked him up. No, it was a community college that looked at him and said, Come on, you can do it. Or the person who won the gold for women's gold for hurdles. She said, the reason I'm competing as for Team USA is because I've never won anything in the NCAA that is of prominence. So I want to win a gold for Team USA. Like those stories make you wonder what their past determination was. What did they do all through their lives to come to that point and win that gold? How did they live all these years and now they have a gold and we all are going saying, wow, that is amazing. So this morning I want to share with you the backstory. The backstory of these three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yes, they were taken as political captives. Yes, they were enslaved and they were called to serve the king of Babylon. Yes, they were taken to an academy where they were forced to learn different languages and culture and philosophy and the politics of that region. During this time when they were taken away from their families, everything that they know, they did something different. They were put in this academy to learn all these stuff, and they were told this. They were given the finest food that the land could offer. But these men knew that they were not supposed to eat food that was offered to idols. They knew what their food laws were, the kosher laws were. And these young men, in Daniel 1, we read that they took a stand. Daniel, and along with these three young men, they took a stand. They said, we don't need to eat the finest food that you have to offer. We don't need to eat the food that is offered to idols. We don't need to eat food that is against what God commanded us to eat. Rather, we'll eat just simple vegetables and grain. When no one was looking, when they were taken away from their home, when they were in a complete new community, they took a stand. They took a stand when life or death was not what they were facing. But they took a stand to do the right thing when no one was looking. I think this is the key for us, friends. This is the key for our Christian living. Yes, we can look at the determination of these young people and say, wow, look at their courage. How could they have done this? How could they have stood up to power and said no to the most powerful man? But I think it started in the small things. I think it started when they decided to follow the commands of God by not eating the food that was offered to idols. It started in the small things. Friends, this morning the scripture is telling us that we need to take a stand for God in the simple things, in the small things, in the things when we know what is right and when we know what is wrong and no one is looking. We are called to choose God in those moments. We are called to take a stand for God. When we do that, we end up with the courage that these three young men had, who could stand firm and say, even if our God doesn't show up, we will still follow the command set forth for us. Let us pray. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the testimony of these heroes of our faith who stood firm to the convictions of their faith. God, we ask that you would give us strength, that you would give us strength and the conviction to stand firm in the simple things. Help us to choose right. Help us to choose righteousness. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.